Highbridge, a division of Recorded Books, presents Levon, From Down in the Delta to the Birth of the Band and Beyond, by Sandra B. Tooze. Read by Rosemary Benson. 1. Best Seat in the House. Levon Helm always said of the Arkansas Delta, "It's where blues, country, and gospel hit in a head-on collision, which became rock and roll." Round about cotton-picking time each fall, while Levon was growing up in the 1940s and 50s, tent shows would stop off in Marvel, a bustling little town near his home in Turkey Scratch. For Levon, a precocious, fun-loving child, there was nothing better. Across the road from the fairgrounds, troops such as Silas Green from New Orleans, or Levon's favorite, the F.S. Walcott Rabbit's Foot Minstrels, would pitch a large 4- or 5-pole tent around a couple of flatbed trucks, positioned side by side to create the stage. Smaller tents served as dressing rooms and refreshment stands. A master of ceremonies, dressed in a top hat and twirling a cane, introduced the performers. Singers, blackface comedians, a chorus line of beautiful dancers, and a 9- or 12-piece band with horns and a full rhythm section that included, most crucially, a drummer. It was the only time that country people like us could see a real staged show with costumes and lights and music and everything, Levon remarked. So that was high rollin' back in the cotton country, and we always went, of course. You couldn't beat that show. In those days, Helm noted, the audience was segregated. People with red hair and freckles would be on one side, and darker complexions on the other. I'd be sitting there right in front of the drummer, just staring at him all night. To young Levon, the drum stool looked like the best seat in the house. The main program ended at about 10:30 or 11 o'clock, when most families with children went home, but Levon's father would let him stick around. For an extra $1 or so, the late-night show, called the Midnight Ramble, continued until 12. That's when the jokes would get spicier and the girls would do a little hoochie-coochie dance, Levon often said, with a twinkle in his eye. Back then, to get down to a bikini was like, goddamn. Looking back on a career that coincided with the evolution of modern music, Helm cited those tent shows as seminal to the development of rock and roll. Today, when folks ask me where rock and roll came from, I always think of our Southern medicine shows and that wild midnight ramble. Chuck Berry's Duck Walk, Elvis Presley's Rockabilly Gyrations, Little Richard's Dancing on the Piano, Jerry Lee Lewis's Antics, and Ronnie Hawkins' Camel Walk would have come right off F.S. Walcott's stage. Mark Levon Helm was born in Elaine, Arkansas, on May 26, 1940, to Nell and Diamond Helm, the second of 4 surviving children. It was a tiny town, population 634, situated at the heart of the Arkansas Delta, the alluvial plain of the Mississippi River, 25 miles southwest of Helena and 90 miles southwest of Memphis. His parents were sharecroppers, both with their roots in the area. Bubba Sullivan, the same age as Levon, was also born in Elaine, and he recalls it as a lively town when he was growing up. It did, however, have an infamous past. Back in 1919, Phillips County was a hotbed of racial unrest, with black citizens protesting unfair sharecropping practices, trying to organize a farmers' union, while white planters were quaking in fear of a communist revolution. Terrified that a black insurrection was at hand, white women and children were evacuated to Helena, while those who stayed behind were barricaded in heavily guarded buildings. When shots were fired at a black church meeting, authorities claimed a riot was underway. The Helm family heeded the warnings, armed with guns to defend themselves and their property, but the unrest never reached them. Some whites rampaged through the countryside, killing all the blacks they encountered. Troops were sent in, and all blacks in the area were thrown into a stockade. Those who supported unionization were charged with murder and tortured to elicit confessions. Morse Gist, who became the proprietor of a Helena music store, remembered his mother telling him that his father, an ex-trooper, was called back into service. His dad was sent to Elaine, where, Gist said, "I got the impression he was not very proud of what took place down there." Levon was born into a state that had never fully recovered from the Civil War. The economy had been devastated, and slavery was replaced by sharecropping, which was still a form of peonage for blacks and poor whites. Following a feeble recovery in the 1920s, the Great Flood, Great Drought, then Great Depression brought more disaster to Arkansas. Of the 1930s in the Arkansas Delta, English novelist Naomi Mitchinson wrote, "I have traveled over most of Europe and part of Africa, but I have never seen such terrible sights as I saw yesterday among the sharecroppers of Arkansas." Elaine is situated only a couple of miles from the Mississippi River, and when Nell and Diamond lived there with their first baby, Medina, before Levon was born, there were gangs of itinerant laborers working on the nearby levee. Some of these drifters were ruthless criminals, and on one occasion the Helm family found their country cabin surrounded. As Levon heard it, "One night they were having supper. They heard a rattling at the door. They heard a rattle at the window. They knew there was somebody out there. A rattle at the back door. They knew there were a lot of people out there. My dad makes a big show of taking up his shotgun, loading it up, getting behind my mom. Mom picks up the baby, picks up the lamp. They walk out the door. Nobody bothers them. They knew they got to keep walking, and there was nothing to look back for. The food on the table was what it was all about." When Levon was a baby, more than half of all Arkansans were farmers, and the state was limping out of the Depression. Residents had poor access to health care, and a survey of the state's school children found that 90% displayed some physical ailment, including rickets and undernourishment. The quality of education was well below the national average, with only 70,000 of the 170,000 youths of high school age enrolled in school. Only 8.7% of those aged 25 and over had completed 4 years of high school. When the draft for World War II was instituted in September 1940, there was a problem recruiting in Arkansas because so many men were not up to military standards. A rejection rate of 43% due to poor health and low education levels. As the war ended, mechanized agriculture was displacing laborers, and many returning veterans dismissed farming outright. Combined with a lack of jobs in other sectors, it all led to a population decrease in 1940s Arkansas. Then there was the stain of segregation, a reality of the South while Levon was growing up. The first school district in Arkansas's Delta region to integrate was Hoxie in 1955, but in 1957, Governor Orville Faubus used the Arkansas National Guard to prevent integration at Little Rock's Central High School. Levon's father, Jasper Diamond Helm, was born in 1910 in Holly Grove, directly west of Phillips County. Tall and lean with limited education, he was resolute in his opinions and as equally unshakable in his support of Levon. Levon's mother, Emma Nell Helm, was born in 1916, was pretty and blonde, a sweet woman who nevertheless was the disciplinarian of the family. They were gregarious, Levon's close friend Paul Berry recalls, both of them extroverts in their own way, totally unself-conscious about their background. Levon's personality is very, very reflective of his mom and daddy. Nell married Diamond in Elaine in 1933, and their first daughter, Medina, was born the following year. Linda was born 2 years after Levon, followed by a baby who died, then the birth of Levon's brother, Wheeler. As a child, Levon was especially close with his sisters and very protective of them. Throughout the years, he became especially devoted to Medina. While Levon was an infant, the family moved about 30 miles north to the small settlement of Turkey Scratch, Arkansas, on the western edge of Big Creek. The region saw conflict in the Civil War after Unionists freed the slaves in the Helena area. During the Battle of Big Creek, Confederate soldiers raided plantations that had been confiscated by the Unionists, intending to re-enslave the workers. On July 27, 1864, approximately 15 miles south of where Turkey Scratch came to be located, about 400 colored Unionist infantry and artillerymen held off almost twice as many Confederate soldiers until the Illinois cavalry arrived and repelled the Confederates, although they continued to stage raids in the area. In the early days, before there was a township of Turkey Scratch, only a few settlers had cleared small farms in that vicinity. Most of the territory west of Big Creek was undeveloped timberland, with low wetlands punctuated with sand ridges. The hunting was excellent and varied, with one exception. There were few wild turkeys. One group of hunters brought a flock there to establish themselves. As the turkeys scrounged for insects to eat, they clawed the leaves off the sand ridges. Thus, the name of the hunting grounds became Turkey Scratch. Robert Lockwood, Jr., the great bluesman who considered himself the stepson of Robert Johnson, was born here in 1915. After drainage canals were dug around 1923, more land could be cleared, roads were built, and new farmers settled. A.B. Thompson Sr. and his wife Jessie moved to the area in 1929. He built a general store and post office and called the corner where it was situated Turkey Scratch. Until Levon was 3 or 4 years old, his family lived in a shack not far from A.B. Thompson's shop, on the opposite side of the road. Like most sharecroppers' homes, it was elevated somewhat by pyramid-shaped concrete blocks as a guard against flooding, although this house was a substantial distance from Big Creek. It was an unpainted shotgun shack, but turned sideways, so the longest sides faced front and back. It had a small living room, 2 bedrooms, and at the back a kitchen with a wood stove. A pot-belly stove probably supplied heat for the front room. A long front porch extended the width of the house, and a smaller porch was outside the kitchen. There was a water pump in the yard, as well as an outhouse. Like Elaine, this was cotton country, flat as a drumhead, the cultivated fields interspersed with stands of oaks, gums, ash, and cypress. During the long summers, when it was time to chop cotton, the average temperature rose to 95 degrees and could climb much higher. "Boy, that sun would rip your hide right off," Levon said, remembering the oppressive heat in the shadeless fields. Diamond, as a typical sharecropper, likely farmed about 20 acres of cotton on land owned by A.B. Thompson Sr., who also owned their house. Devised after slavery to keep workers tied to the land in service to the planter, the sharecropping system usually designated half the profits from the crop at harvest time to the owner, with the sharecropper keeping the rest. This type of farming was a family occupation. As soon as children were old enough, they helped. By the age of 7, Levon had a summer job as a water boy for the families and hired hands working in the fields. It was a happy childhood, abounding in laughs and mischief. Levon was an attractive, clean-cut youngster, with blonde, neatly combed hair, typically dressed in freshly laundered shirt and jeans. Brimming with hijinks and jokes, he was quick to coax a chuckle out of most situations. Irreverent, yet kind and thoughtful, he possessed a magnetic charm that drew people to him and allowed him to sidestep situations he wanted to avoid. Levon had a laid-back personality, but despite that, was the leader of the pack. He was not reluctant to tell his friends what to do and how to do it. They loved him anyway. The residence the Helms moved to next, still on A.B. Thompson's land, was farther from the store, tucked back on a dirt road on land adjoining Big Creek, and near the Cavett family. Longtime neighbors, the Helms and Cavetts were also the best of friends. Clyde and Arlena Cavett had one son and 3 girls, Mary, Tiny, and Jessie May, whom everyone called Sister. Levon's mother, Nell, and Arlena had grown up together in Elaine, and most Sundays the 2 families got together for dinner. In fact, they had relatives in common. One of Mary's aunts married Levon's uncle, and another aunt married Nell's cousin. Often Levon just called Mary his sister. "I don't remember ever not knowing him," another neighbor, Anna Lee Amsden, née Williams, declares. "We went to grade school, high school, graduated together. We'd just always been friends." She was born the same year as Levon, and her sister Peggy and Levon's sister Linda were the same age, so they all spent a lot of time together as kids. "We'd go to each other's house," Anna Lee says. "Our parents would play cards together, and if the kids went to sleep, that's where they left them until the next morning. So there might be 4 or 5 kids piled up on one bed, and that's where we'd wake up the next morning, and our parents would come get us. We were just like brother and sister forever." Another of Levon's closest friends was Charles Mutt Cagle, whose family lived about a mile away from the Helms. In fact, before Levon's sister Medina finished high school, she married Mutt's brother Ralph, and their son Terry, Levon's nephew, would follow a musical path like his uncle. The Helm household was full of fun. Both Nell and Diamond had a good sense of humor. "It was like a carnival every time you went over there," Anna Lee recollects, chuckling, "because Levon would do something that Nell would get so upset with him over, and she'd want to kill him, but she wound up laughing." It didn't matter that economically they were impoverished. Anna Lee continues, "We were probably in the 4th or 5th grade before any of us had electricity, if we had it that early. Mutt Cagle's dad had the first television in the area. I remember Wednesday nights we would all go over there and watch the fights. Eventually we all got television and fans. We were all dirt poor, but we didn't know it, because everybody was the same. We didn't know there was any other way. It didn't bother us not having electricity or an indoor bathroom because nobody else had one." Mary Vaden, née Cavett, laughs when she thinks of Diamond. "Oh, my Lord, Diamond always knew the answer to everything. Sometimes it wasn't correct, but he was adamant about it. He was a strong supporter of Levon, and if Levon said, 'Let's walk down this ditch naked,' he'd say, 'Well, okay, son.' He was very outgoing." Mary doesn't recall him doing much farm work. He hired out a lot of it. He had a job as deputy sheriff for the Marvel police force in the late 1940s or early 1950s. Levon's uncle, Alan Cooper, was deputy sheriff there in the 1960s. Nell was a God-fearing woman who taught her children that, despite the segregated society they lived in, all races were equal. She was strict with them, as well as with her extended family and the neighbors' kids. Both Levon and her grandson, Terry Cagle, remember her digging her fingernails into their scalp when they misbehaved. Mary admits, "She'd spank me as quick as she'd spank Levon. She was a special person. She was the one in the family who kept a hand on him. It wasn't Diamond." Keeping her children clean and tidy on a dirt farm wasn't easy. "Nell washed laundry in a washpot," Mary says, "and hung the clothes on a line with starch, and they were as stiff as a board, and she would iron them with a flat iron. Levon would never get out of that house and onto that school bus without starched and ironed blue jeans with a crease in them. Levon had some Chickasaw blood through his father's mother, Dolly. After Diamond's father died and left her with 7 or 8 children, Dolly married a Pentecostal preacher named Luther Crawford. Miss Dolly, oh, she was a mess, Mary recalls with a laugh. We'd go down to her house in West Helena, and she lived in a shotgun house, and you could just run straight through. And we'd run and play, running back and forth, and she'd say of Levon, "That child is going to be in prison before he's grown." She just could not make him behave. After her second husband died, Dolly moved in with the Helms. When Nell called her for dinner, she'd reply, "Well, if the Lord's willing, I'll make it," Mary says. And she would carry this spittoon with her wherever she went. It was a Maxwell House can, a coffee can, and she carried it everywhere. And she'd be talking to you and spitting. I always thought she looked like a little bird. She was so cute, and she was always immaculately dressed, very clean, starched and ironed, and she would put her hair up in a bun. She still was in charge, she thought. Levon adored his grandfather, Wheeler Wilson, Nell's father, who lived in nearby Marvel. Mary remembers him as kind and sweet. Nell's parents separated when she was a child, and Wheeler married Agnes, whom Nell thought of as her mother. Later in life, Levon bought them a house. Agnes had only one earlobe as the result of a contentious partnership her grandfather had regarding a corn crop. When Wheeler's disgruntled partner burst into their house, a gunfight ensued, and a bullet sheared off part of Agnes's ear. Levon was nurtured in an incredibly tight, loving community. Many people in Turkey Scratch were, at the very least, distant kin, and even those who weren't, black or white, were often called aunt or uncle by the children. One example was Sam Tillman, a black man who worked for Annalee's uncle and lived with his family just down the road from the Helms. We all loved him, but he would get on to us just like he would one of his kids, Annalee points out. And Levon made the remark one time that he'd always go see Sam every time that he came home. And he said, "You know, babe, I believe Sam would still spank me if I did something wrong." He was part of the community, and we loved him to death. Every year on the 4th of July, the residents of Turkey Scratch got together for a fish fry picnic. The men went hogging for catfish in Big Creek. Then the women fried the catch in lard and served it with fried potatoes and watermelon. For Halloween, the adults would throw a wiener roast party for the kids. On other occasions, families got together for house parties, pie suppers, or bonfires. Nearly all the white people in the community attended County Line Missionary Baptist Church on County Line Road outside Turkey Scratch. One Sunday every June, the congregation held a Southern church custom called all-day singing and dinner on the ground. Daddy would hook the horses to the wagon, and Mama would have a wagon full of food, Mary reminisces. I don't know why they cooked so much. People would bring a sheet, and they would line them up end to end all around one side of the church. They'd lay it out, and people would eat all day long, and they would sing hymns. Levon loved that because he could eat all day. Levon said, "Everybody would make picnic baskets and bring them to the church. They'd get out a big meal at dinner time. They'd lay out bed sheets and put the food out all lined up, a row of bed sheets, and a big tub of lemonade down at the end. It was great." It was spiritual, but also fun. "You know, music is supposed to have that kind of effect," he said. "It's supposed to take you out of these troubles and misfortunate times." Levon loved those things, Annalee confirms. He couldn't wait. People would bring potato salad, and they'd bring block ice for tea. To the day he died, he always wanted to have something like that in marble. He talked to me about that so many times. Music was a significant part of life in Turkey Scratch, especially in the Helm household. Mary attributes most of Levon's prodigious musical talent to his mother. Nell and Medina had beautiful alto voices, and they also sang in church, although there wasn't yet a church choir. Diamond, a musician with a good bass voice, had a deep repertoire of folk and country songs that he passed on to Levon. Sitting on Top of the World was one of Diamond's favorites, and several tracks on Levon's 2007 recording, Dirt Farmer, were songs the family sang at home. As Levon pointed out, songs like The Girl I Left Behind, Blind Child, and Little Birds are the first songs that I ever learned. My mom and my older sister were good singers, and my dad played guitar and sang for Saturday night house dances out in the country. We all came from that participation generation, you know. If you wanted to hear music back then, you had to sing it yourself and play for each other. It was from singing with his family that Levon developed his understanding of vocal harmony. He credited Little Birds for providing him with his first awareness of where to place harmonies and how they support each other. Before he had a guitar or drums, Levon was singing while beating out a rhythm in ham-bone dances, a holdover from minstrel shows, where the performers stomp and pat their arms, chest, and legs in time with the music. He remembered a house party one night at his Uncle Pudge's when he was a young child. They moved the furniture aside, and the music was supplied by a guitarist, a fiddle player, and likely someone on mandolin. I had a big grocery box, pasteboard box, Levon said, and I beat that thing to death that night. I volunteered to play percussion. Before the Helm house had electricity, they had a battery-operated radio. Or if the battery failed, Diamond extended a cable from the tractor battery to the radio in order to tune into stations as far away as Shreveport, Oklahoma City, or Nashville. Nashville's WLAC was known for its R&B shows, and that city's WSM broadcast of the Grand Ole Opry with Bill Monroe and his Bluegrass Boys was a family favorite. As Levon got older, WDIA Memphis had disc jockeys B.B. King and Rufus Thomas. A host of blues stars played on West Memphis station KWEM, and Ike Turner had a show on Clarksdale, Mississippi's WROX. And throughout it all, Helena had KFFA. Levon's musical tastes were significantly shaped by a steady diet of blues on Helena's radio KFFA, which was inaugurated in 1941 upstairs in the Floyd Truck Lines building on Cherry Street. Beginning in November that year, every day from noon until 12:15, and later 12:15 to 12:30, the station aired the first regular radio show to feature blues, King Biscuit Time. When Max Moore, owner of the Interstate Grocery Company, got stuck with a load of flour he couldn't move, he had a brilliant idea how to advertise it. Bubba Sullivan got the story from King Biscuit Time's longest-serving host, Sonny Payne. Sonny Boy Williamson and them wanted to play on the radio, and Sonny Payne said that Mr. Max Moore was smart enough to know that there was like 142 grocery stores in Phillips County then, so he got King Biscuit Flour as a sponsor, and he gave them 15 minutes on the radio. You think, now, here it is, 1941, and you hear blacks on the radio. Shit, that was the first station that ever let blacks play. A big deal. The longest-running radio show in history first featured live performances by harmonica player and singer Sonny Boy Williamson II, a.k.a. Rice Miller, and electric guitarist Robert Lockwood, both vocalists as well, then soon included James Peck Curtis on drums and pianist Robert Dudlow Taylor. It was a huge success.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?